Oh, welcome everyone who's joining remotely. I think one of my few silver linings about the past 3 years has been the amount of people who could join remotely. And so we have had attendees and speakers from every continent, except Antarctica. We're not big among the penguins. And that's been really nice. So I think, over the last 10 years, we've really seen NLP move from being a fringe technology to something that people interact with every day, which has meant that it's been increasingly important that even those of us who have been in the industry for years, like Stephen, who just came in late. Hi. We have a bigger responsibility to the broader world and the impact of our technologies than ever. So having these remote meetings and being able to speak to and take feedback from people from every part of the world, I think is a positive move for us here in the Bay Area, which makes me especially excited about the talk tonight. I'm sure most of you work in data labeling and have seen data labeling as something that's just thrown over the fence. One of the things that I like about Datasaur that's probably not going to be in the presentation today, so I think I'm hopefully not stealing your thunder, is that a lot of the engineering has also been outsourced to Indonesia. So letting data scientists and engineers from a part of the world you don't normally associate with Silicon Valley participate in the information economy and contribute to a lot of companies that work here. But I won't say anything more about Datasaur tonight. To do that, we have our host, Mike Tung, the CEO of DivBot here, and we are very grateful for hosting this first in-person and hopefully non-super spreader NLP event in many years. Thanks.
Go ahead and stand here. Okay. Hey, remote people. Hey everyone, I'm Mike Tung. I'm the founder and CEO of DivBot. Welcome to the DivBot office. We're very happy to have you guys here, the NLP meetup, since we work on NLP as well. So it's a topic near and dear to our company. Just a little, I won't spend too much talking about DivBot, even though Ivan said I should talk a little bit more, but basically we crawl the entire web and convert it into the world's largest automated knowledge graph. So besides Google and Bing, we're the only other really company based in the US that crawls the entire public web. We have a copy of the internet in Fremont, about 100 billion web pages, and we convert it into a knowledge graph and for business purpose instead of for showing you ads, basically, and ranking pages for consumers. And NLP plays a big part of that. So identifying entities, we work on problems like entity linking and record linking and knowledge fusion and all those fun NLP topics. And Ivan, we go way back. So I've known Ivan for 10 years plus, all the way from back when we were in a Stanford incubator together called StartX, when Ivan was working on basically Pokemon Go way before that happened. So he was way well ahead of its time. With Geomon, and then which was successfully sold to Yahoo, right? And then he went to Apple, where he managed a lot of data labelers. So he's well qualified to give this talk, and as well as at Go Butler, I remember, right? So another human in the loop, I think, right? Or hybrid AI assistant, right? So also a lot of data labeling involved there. And so Ivan is one of the most, highest integrity, most trustworthy founders that I know. So, so he's a dear friend of mine, and excited to host the event to have today. And I'm excited to see actually Datasaur. So I'm just as excited as all you guys to hear what the topic is. So without further ado.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you for the kind introduction. We pieced all of this together. So I always hate saying this, but in this case, it's particularly important. For those of you who are remote, I just want to make sure you are seeing the correct desktop. Do you see the slide with the blue dinosaur on it?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. All right, welcome everybody. It's very exciting to be here. I've been part of the NLP Bay Area Meetup group for 3 years, but this is the first time attending an in-person event. Without further ado, let's jump right into things. So today's topic, taking the pain out of data labeling, the best practices for data collection and task design. The way I want to set up this talk, I really love having an interactive conversation, but just because of the size of the crowd, I'm going to pause about a third of the way into the talk, pause for questions there, and I'll finish the talk, and then we can complete with another round of Q&A. Now, let's start with some context. This is not going to be a surprise to folks in this room, but the last few years have been really exciting for NLP. Big picture, right? There are new records being set, it feels like every quarter, every 6 months. I would go so far as to say that 2015 to 2020 was like the age of computer vision in terms of hype. But this decade, especially with some of the announcements in the last couple of weeks with the funding round for Jasper and also the stability diffusion news, I think this is shaping up to be the decade of NLP. When I started this company in 2019, I was placing a bet on that NLP future. I actually believe that out of all the branches of AI, NLP was the most mature and the most production ready. And I think that vision has really started to pan out over the last few years. We've seen so many applications of NLP across many different industries. And this is just a sampling of the real world use cases we support today. I heard somebody out there talking about how they're in the medical industry and using this to capture doctors' notes. We're supporting the legal industry, e-commerce, chatbots, even online conferencing and the transcriptions of conversations like this one, right? Also, for anyone curious, all of today's images are either AI generated or from meme generators. That's why the slightly funky fit pictures. We've also seen the types of NLP evolve and become increasingly advanced. Whereas in 2019, I think everyone was still focused primarily on things like entity recognition and text classification, sentiment analysis. We're seeing more and more companies adopt more advanced forms of NLP, including co-reference resolution, dependency parsing, data extraction from an increasing source of documents, right? And so the time between these topics being presented in academic research papers through to real world production is getting shorter and shorter. And that's really exciting for me. At the center of this revolution, our philosophy is that the basic Lego building block that will power all of this technology is labeled data. English is hard, right? Just take a look at all the ways that we use run in the English language. Now, here's my first interactive question of the night. This is something a college professor did with us. Guess how many meanings there are for the word run in the English language, official dictionary definitions. Higher. Higher still, by a lot. Close, a little bit lower.
184.
I'll give it to you. It's 179.
Okay.
179 official definitions of this one word. It overtook the word take, I believe, to set this record, right? But
Which
it's
dictionary are we talking about?
Did it overtake take or did it overrun take?
this is why I'm scared giving a talk to this crowd in particular. Okay, but that is why it is hard teaching these computers our language, right? It is hard enough for folks learning English. Now we have to teach these computers. So you can quote me on this. If you look closely at the fine print, that is my quote there. But I believe that less than 0.001% of all the required labeled data has been labeled so far. And that means we've got our work cut out for us. Unfortunately, the data science classes and the AI classes that we took in school are not teaching us the basics for how to approach labeled data. The analogy I use is this. I got a degree in computer science from Stanford, and they never once taught me how to use GitHub. right? That is like the basic thing that every engineer has to learn as soon as you get out of school. So I had to self-teach myself GitHub. And similarly now in AI engineering, nobody's teaching us how to design data sets, define labels, or address the potential biases. And that's why we see all these negative headlines about the use of AI. It's because we weren't prepared to go into this world and figure all this stuff out, right? What I'm seeing is just team after team figuring this out and learning, reinventing the wheel, learning the lessons the hard way over and over again. And that's why I want to give this talk. I've been in your shoes. I spent 7 years making these mistakes. You saw this in the bio. I spent hundreds of millions of dollars at Apple labeling data and honestly wasting a bit of it. Sorry. I've interviewed over 200 teams from around the world, right? And I've talked to all these folks, how they approach. Some are very advanced in their methods. Some are just getting started. And I want to share some of the best practices that we've learned along the way. Who are we? A bit about the company itself. As Mike alluded to earlier, we went through the Stanford Startups Accelerator. We were a Y Combinator company in winter of 2020. We've been funded by Initialized Capital, the CTOs of Segment and OpenAI. There's over 5 million labels applied on our site each month, and we are serving top companies, institutions, and nonprofits globally. A sampling of our customers available here. Okay. Sorry, some lag. This is AirPlay here. Okay. If people are interested in the next couple of slides, there's an amazing public presentation by Maria Stone called The Agony and Ecstasy of Human Label Collection that goes into great detail. But I want to give a quick summary. The important takeaway here is that data labeling is not new. We are just the latest generation reinventing this practice that has been practiced for at least decades. Right? So back in 1963, the Cranfield experiments, these were studies on information retrieval. And back then, everything was objective. These were librarians and experts who were doing the labeling themselves and doing very specific studies, right? Fast forward a few decades, and DARPA and NIST established this conference, and they start expanding the Cranfield methodology to a lot more tracks. And what that does is, now that this is more popular, we start seeing service providers pop up around the world offering human intelligence labor for hire. In 2001, there's a concept called Mechanical Turk that is patented. For those of you not familiar with the story here, it's a quick, fun one. The Mechanical Turk was a robot many centuries ago. And the promise was that this robot could beat you, a human, at chess. And they went from town to town, just destroying the best human in the village. The secret was, inside this robot was a human hunched over who was very good at chess and would control the robot, right? And it's that concept that, turned into this Mechanical Turk idea that we're using today. And in 2004, I still remember playing this growing up. There was this game that you could set up where two players would enter labels for an image until they agreed. And this allowed them to reach a much broader user base and just crowdsource all of these ideas and get them to finally agree on what the right labels for this image are.
Does it still count as Mechanical Turk if there's a robot inside a person rather than a person inside a robot?
We'll get there, I think, by the end of this decade. Over the next couple of decades, we see this industry continue to evolve. It's called many different things: raters, annotators, labelers. There's data extraction for the semantic web, if you remember all the hype around the semantic web, right? But as companies and product owners start establishing these guidelines, they start hiring these commercial providers that started popping up in 1992, right? And this introduces a number of confounding factors. There's bias by these product owners. They don't have the academic expertise to design these studies, and they have both conscious and subconscious biases built into the task design, right? Because the amount of data gathering increased, it changed from companies labeling themselves to crowdsourcing that labeling, which is good to get information from the real world users, but now there's more disagreement and more ambiguity, which then matches the tasks at hand. So for example, if someone's searching for Starbucks, are they looking for the latest stock quote, the menu, or the nearest location, right? Sorry, I saw a hand, but I'm going to pause in just a couple of slides here. So we see all of these, this evolution. And again, it's not about AI, it's just gathering data from humans. Now, fast forward to 2019, and I start Datasaur, and I start interviewing these engineering teams. What we discover, and this is a market study, right? AI engineers, we hire them to test models and fine-tune parameters. And yet what we found is that they're wasting 80% of their time on things that they weren't trained or hired to do. At the same time, the best possible action oftentimes to improve those models is to add more quality data. And I think that's the gap that we wanted to address. So before I move on, let me pause there. Questions about kind of the history and the context of this conversation? Yeah.
Page 11. This page 11. And suggest your title to be data labeled on the web, the history, because strictly go back to like 2D decimal code or something. No, I mean, I'm being serious. Like, because when you say labeling earlier,
yeah,
I mean, there's like basic like taxonomy, like this is sports, this is show this is history. But when you get to the point that there's multiple overlapping tags,
yeah,
or that we're tagging not the entire article,
yeah,
you never really define labeling. And like presumably the concept of labeling has developed as much.
Yes, that is fair. I think I can call this data labeling in the age of computer science. How about that?
Well, that's specifically on web content.
Right.
Well, maybe data labeling as a service didn't really exist outside of linguistic organizations.
But did you, for government purposes, like the Dewey Decimal Code and stuff existed before there was a commercial use.
Sure. Let's go with data labeling for the web. Cool. So let me know if this sounds familiar to you for those in the room today. The data needs labeling. Lots of labels. Millions of labels, perhaps, by the end of next week. There's only 3 of us, right? How do we go about this? The conclusion for many is, well, I've heard of all these vendors. There's labeling experts. They're in like low-cost countries. We should be able to just outsource this, and it's scalable, right? Problem solved. Let's just go hire one of these firms and just get it done. But in reality, that's really not how it works, right? Training the labelers on your specific task can take weeks. The guidelines themselves can be over 20 pages. I once worked on a 70-page guideline document, and there's high turnover rate. So the people that you've trained are now turning over, and you have to train entirely new ones, right? This is what we saw across all these teams and the kind of obstacles that they ran into time and again. So with today's talk, I want to be addressing the real problems in the room, right? Here's a series of questions that I think you have to ask yourselves before you begin the task of labeling. And if I accomplish my mission here today, then a process that might take you well over a year, hopefully we can consolidate down to under 3 months. All right. First, let's start with a set of questions. There is the notion of crowdsourced versus managed service versus internal. The spectrum actually goes further than that. Really what we see is people start by saying, oh, there's 100 files here. Let me label that myself. And then you start hiring interns or grad students or someone off of Craigslist, right? Then you start asking your colleagues to help out and you have an in-house team. And then you work with one of these crowdsourced companies and you realize that the quality is not good enough. And then you work with a managed service. This is a very common journey. I thought I was the only one going through it, but we're seeing this time and again. And there's different pros and cons to each of these. So as you go through this, you have to ask yourself, what level of quality is required? For the person in the room who is working on medical use cases, it could be literally human lives on the line, and quality is of the utmost importance. For others, recently we were talking to a financial services company, and they were just trying to, do sentiment analysis on S1s and kind of financial documents. And there, as long as you're like broadly in the right area, it's okay. So there's trade-offs between how much you want to spend in getting the highest quality versus just getting something done and out there as quickly as possible. How complex is the job, right? How much time is going to be needed to spend on each particular task? How much training is required? This goes hand in hand with how much expertise. For some, you need medical experts, trained lawyers, accountants. For others, you still need like different language expertise. And it's not just fluency in Spanish at like a high school level. It's like, I need to have grown up in Latin America and understand that this is a household brand name, or this is a really famous celebrity, right? How much of volume of labeling is required? That may also impact your decision in who to go with here. By what deadline? And correlated to that, at what frequency? How frequently are we going to run these labeling jobs? What's the SLA, right? What do we expect as a turnaround time? And finally, of course, how much is your company willing to spend on something like this? Because for every single one of those, you could go for the highest quality. I want the most dedicated labelers, the highest trained labelers, but then you're going to have to pay for that. So being able to understand and establish these guidelines and be able to know and filter who you're looking for is really important. I am sorry, I know there's some Amazon folks in the room. Universally, what I've seen is a lot of companies start with something like Mechanical Turk, and they decide that this doesn't meet the level of quality that they require.
I do not support Mechanical Turk.
Didn't want to call you out, but yes, Mechanical Turk is great for certain types of tasks, but for AI labeling, it's easy to game. It's too complex for a service like this. I receive an email every other day from a new labeling vendor who wants to partner with us. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of vendors around the world to choose from. Now, for yourself as a data engineer, as data scientist, as an AI engineer, that can take up a lot of your time vetting and going through and having all of these conversations, right? Running trials, POCs, gathering feedback on this work can take months that you just can't afford when you need to deliver the model by the end of the quarter. So you need to have a list of questions handy to filter out the vendors you want to work with to begin with, right? So this is a business problem in addition to an ethical one. Who is doing your labeling? Under what conditions? For how many hours, right? Do they get benefits? Who's providing the laptop or the computer that they're doing the labeling on? Will you provide training? Are they full-time or contractors? These are important questions to understand about the services that you work with, because if one of these things goes awry, you get headlines like this one, right? Where people are overworked, understaffed, working in terrible conditions and developing mental health problems. This is a real modern day problem with, real world effects. So I wanted to make sure we address the labeler's point of view. This is really important to understand and empathize with your labelers. And I wanted to make sure we spend a couple of minutes talking about this. Imagine you're a labeler. The work that you're doing is tedious, it's boring, it's repetitive. You are constantly being evaluated and tested. If you don't pass, you lose your job, right? The rules of the game, the guidelines are constantly changing as the PM in Silicon Valley is changing their mind. They know, they're fully aware that they're building the system that will automate their job away. There's a slow and poor escalation system. It takes forever to get feedback. Oftentimes with time zone differences, it's like 24 hours until you can make progress and resolve these issues. There's some faceless corporate boss. They may not actually interface with them, ever be on a call with them. They just keep getting changing rules. And so what they need to do is they learn to game the system. And then on our side, we're complaining about why people are doing all this, like, this is technically correct, but not in the spirit of the work that we're trying to do, right? Because it feels like, it's us versus them kind of mentality. They talk, they share notes. So not only is it important to just be an empathetic human being here, but additional turnover in a volatile business like this can be even higher when they feel like the projects they're working on are for a dead-end job. Data privacy and compliance. When we're selling to companies, we've started talking to compliance teams all the time. The good news is that Californian and European policies are bringing more attention to data privacy issues. But once again, you have to be prepared to answer these questions. And again, we're not trained to do this, right? As engineers, as data scientists, but you have to start thinking through, like, who can access your data? What are the regulatory requirements? How would you handle a data leak if it happened? These might be questions that your legal department can deal with, but now when you're vetting those vendors, you need to be able to answer and ask these questions up front. designing the right job. I'll start with a quote down here, right? This is a famous, arguably infamous quote at this point. I know it when I see it. And it was used by a US Supreme Court justice with relation to the definition of pornography, right? And yet we're still, I'm sorry, obscenity, thank you. So we're still seeing the same kind of mentality today. We start out designing these jobs. And again, I'm not calling any of you out. These were mistakes that I made, right? But we assume that the answer is obvious, at least to a smart person or a well-trained person. You know, we did things like, we don't want to add too many answers to our guidelines. We want labelers to use their own intuition. And at the same time, we start adding more examples to guarantee consistency across all the output, right? Everything's very contradictory. This first one is, I think, really important specifically for the world of AI. If we could just write a 3-page series of rules and heuristics that can just get 100% labeling, then why are we trying to train an AI model? Why do we need a human? Just use the heuristics-based system, right? How do we begin to account for basic human error? Even the most conscientious, the most detail-oriented person working 8 hours a day is going to make mistakes. How do you account for bias, subconscious and conscious? How do you account for fatigue, right? You have to constantly ask yourself, is it because the labelers themselves are messing up, or is it because your guidelines are not very well defined, right? So being able to prepare and understand these questions, I think, is another common pitfall as people are setting up the job. I've been asking a lot of questions so far. I want to take some time to also provide some answers, right? Some of the best practices that we see around this, I think it's really important to iterate. Just like we've invented sprint methodology, I think here you start small, you review, you repeat, right? I'll jump down to number 4, dog food your own project. I recommend everyone's doing at least 1% of the labeling themselves, because only by doing the labeling yourself will you be able to understand what the edge cases are and understand why your labelers might be confused on any one of these issues. Redundancy, right? At Datasaur, we call this multi-pass labeling. One mind good, many minds better. What you can do is you can assign multiple people to the exact same document and see where they agree or disagree. This filters out, those 3 questions I asked earlier, error, bias, and fatigue. This can help significantly improve the quality of the output there. Comprehensive guidelines, right? Probing for and documenting those edge cases. And again, kind and empathetic feedback. Everything we learn about usability guidelines for end users, good product design, those same guidelines apply to the AI labeling space as well. Now, the final one of these questions, choosing the right tools, right? Here is a smattering of the many options that you have today. So anything from, the most common ones, still by far, the majority of our customers start out using spreadsheets. The second most option is to build out internal tooling, right? Some engineers like, oh, I can build out this interface in HTML. It'll take me 2 days, and then we can just use that, right? And it'll be better than spreadsheets. And then they add another feature, add another. And before you know it, you have 3 engineers working on this full time for the next 4 years. So, but that is like how everybody kind of approaches this space. And then finally, there's a slew of commercial vendors, each with their own unique way of solving data labeling, right? Some of these approach this from the perspective of automating the labeling, weekly supervised learning. Others approach this from the perspective of just having an open source tool that everybody can contribute to. So, each of these has their own kind of valid points. For today's talk, I'm going to talk through at least Datasaur's own philosophy on how we approach this. We're going to go into a live demo next. Before we do so, any questions? Yeah.
Two questions. So first, to this thing, when we say labeling data, some of those, especially like Apple, it's not necessarily NLP. It could be
Absolutely.
transcript, broadcast audio, it could be the census data set.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You might like to. And page 17. So when you talked about it, the cost of mislabeling data. Yeah. So sort of implicit sub-question before that is what is the business cost of mislabeling? It's negative.
That's right.
And if you're labeling as low quality, it might be better to leave something unlabeled, or at least to mark that the labeling is very unreliable. You say that the cost of mislabeling a cancer image is not cancer is obviously extremely high.
Right.
So there's a certain implicit correctness in business cost.
Yeah.
Or with a self-driving car, the cost of mislabeling a pedestrian is a tree is also very high.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think there can be a mathematical and financial equation applied to it. I think some of the there's
domain specific.
it can be domain specific. It can be the outcome of having the model learn something incorrectly. It can also be, you know, if you start with one vendor and spend 3 months and $20,000 and none of the data is actually usable, it's having to redo all of that, right? Which is both time and money.
Right. But if I'm looking at a money painting, the cost of mislabeling pedestrian tree is very low.
Sure.
But with a self-driving car.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the trade-off between comprehensive guideline and having a guideline like that's too long?
I'm sure that could be a talk in and of itself. I'd say it's very use case specific, right? I think there's a lot of research out there in terms of how you're able to, it really depends, it comes down to like, what is the purpose of your task to begin with? What is the business outcome of the NLP model you want to build? And I think you work backwards from there, right? I'm happy to kind of like talk, if there's anything specific that you have in mind, I'm happy to connect with you after this and just talk through that specific use case. Yeah, so before we jump into the demo, my personal mission, right? So one thing is I spent time at the last 3 companies building out these internal labeling tools at various companies. And I just want to make sure nobody is reinventing the wheel and has to build their own in-house tools again. We also want to improve productivity and quality, right? This is not what we're all here, like what we got our degrees to do. So we enforce industry best practices to ensure the data quality through the product itself. And finally, we want to help, like we want to be a thought leader with and for your team. So we want to help you succeed at adopting NLP in your company. I've worked with individuals in defining and setting up their POCs for success so that they're able to get their director's approval for continuing the NLP work. All right, let's pull this up. Going to see if I can pull this window over. One moment, me. Sure.
So language locale based. So is this how many storefronts for languages covered with your current data?
How many languages are covered with our data?
Well, is it for global labeling tasks?
Yeah. Good question. So because of the nature of our company, because we started in both the US and Indonesia, we were multilingual from the very beginning. And since then, we've taken on languages like Mandarin and Cyrillic. The hardest for us actually was Arabic because it's left to right to left instead of left to right. So it changed our indices around. But at this point, we actually support every language in the world.
No, but sometimes the website on in the specific country are hard to access.
Yeah, we can try to help with that. We do serve a Chinese customer, so we've been able to make it work. But yeah, I think we just have to work with your particular organization on that. Okay, cool. Welcome to Datasaur. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes showing various aspects of our platform. At a high level, what I want to walk us through is the interface itself. The second is the automated intelligence. We want to be able to help automate some of the labeling work. And the final piece is one that is often overlooked in this space, which is the workforce management. So we'll start with the interface. Here we have just a sample document. This one happens to be in the financial space. And what I'll be able to do here is select any text and apply a label to it, right? And I can go through and just keep on applying labels. This also allows me to select a span and have overlapping labels. These numbers here correspond to keyboard shortcuts. So I can just use the keyboard to go through and apply whatever label I deem appropriate for this particular span, right? And finally, we can also support arrows that determine the relationship between one span and another. So that is kind of table stakes. We support the basic interface for labeling itself. Now, in addition to that, we also have this extensions panel on the right-hand side. And what this allows you to do is customize your workspace depending on what's useful for you and your team. So here you can drag and drop, add and remove extensions as appropriate. Now, there's a couple I want to highlight here. The first is the search one. So what this allows you to do is search for a token like bank, and I can go through and apply the organization label to all of those. And that can help, if there were 100 instances of a word, you can apply that to all of those altogether. It also supports regular expression search. So if you need to find like social security numbers or email addresses, you can go and apply all of those all at once. Now, finally, we have this powerful extension called ML assisted labeling. And what was frustrating to me at Apple was that we were wasting time and money labeling things like Starbucks and Saturday and London from scratch. We know what these things are already, right? So what this extension does is I can press this magic button and apply everything that a library like Spacey already knows about this document. So as we scroll down, everything in orange here are the ones that were automatically applied. It recognizes names like Jane Doe and that weekend. It's not going to be 100% correct. Like Social Security in this context, we probably don't want to label as an organization, but you can understand why that was applied there, right? And so what this allows you to do now is get a head start with your labeling. And you can apply like 70% of the labels you need and have your annotators just focus on the domain specific labels that they should be applying, right? Any questions about this interface before I go on?
So then when you label something like Jane Doe as a person, so there's an investment bank called Jane Street that's capitalized.
Right.
So I'm just curious about how often any more label something.
Yeah, so a couple of answers to that. The question for folks on the call, there is entity ambiguity oftentimes. Oh, sorry, I'm not sharing screen for the folks on the call. I'm sorry.
I'd be very polite not saying anything.
Yeah, apologies. I also need to check the chat for questions. Pradeep, are you able to see the screen now, the demo? The question.
Yes, and now I see it.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
you.
I apologize. In the future, please just unmute and just interrupt me here. The question was, there is entity ambiguity, so it won't always be 100% correct. So for example, there's a investment firm called Jane Street. And yeah, I think that is absolutely true, right? Back to one of my points earlier, if we could just use heuristics or existing models to do 100% of the labeling, it wouldn't be correct. So, or you wouldn't need to label and train your own model. So Datasaur is built as a human in the loop system. So the idea here is if something is incorrect, like this social security one, I can apply a new label to it or remove the label and it'll change color, right? So the expectation is that it won't be 100% correct. In addition to that, we also have integrations with a lot of the most popular libraries, including if you're a premium Hugging Face user, you can access their 12,000 open source models, right? And last but not least, we also have this custom API. So this is actually the most popular use case because you can plug in your own existing model, right? If you're on version 7 of a model and it's 83% accurate, you can plug that in, and now the humans are just validating or correcting the output of that model. Okay, go ahead.
Did you look into how much bias
Yes, we actually designed this very conservatively because we want to make sure that we, if we predict for terms that we're not confident in, that will actually screw up your own data set, right? So as we build and design features, we try to be very cognizant of that. We have another feature called Datasaur assisted labeling, where we start learning from your labels and start predicting them to you. But we try to use design patterns that make it clear that this was a model applied or a predicted label, not a human applied one. So we have different color coding in place. For the Datasaur assisted labeling, you can set a confidence threshold. So it'll only apply when our model is like 95% accurate versus 70% accurate. Everything comes back to that quality versus efficiency trade-offs that different companies want to make.
Yeah, so can you apply multiple APIs, and I'm not sure do all of those APIs follow the same standards?
That's a key one, right? So taxonomies can be tricky. You can apply different APIs depending on mixing and matching whichever ones apply work best for you. Yeah, but the key thing is making sure that taxonomies make some level of sense. Go ahead.
In your list of APIs, you didn't include like the standard cloud vendor, you know, Google Azure.
Yeah, we don't by default because there's pass-through charges for the customer and we don't want them like racking up bills that they weren't aware of. But
you could cache.
We could cache them.
You could cache the references. I mean, just for the top million entities.
Sure.
I'm just curious how their taxonomies differ to the other guys.
I think we might have some folks in the room from those companies, but yeah, I think it's trivial for us to add other APIs. So people do ask us to, can you hook into this, and we'll set it up for their workspace. Yeah, go ahead.
How do people actually like build the taxonomy or guideline? Like, does that happen in the tool?
Yeah, good question. So it can, right? So with the taxonomy, you can also set this as a setting, whether you want to allow people to edit the label set. So for some projects, you will start with a taxonomy, but if there's a new edge case that wasn't considered at the beginning, you can add a new label on the fly. For others, they're very strict about their taxonomy. Don't let labelers add anything else, right? So that is an option for you. What was the other question that you had?
Oh, it was basically how you edit and update that like guideline, or I guess, well, so this is a taxonomy, but if I had to bundle instructions or like what to do about different edge cases, that.
Good. So that's a different extension. So first, here's how you would edit it. You can drag and drop. You can even have hierarchical taxonomies here. And if you wanted to have the extension for guidelines, yeah, looks like we have the guidelines installed down here. So you can upload a new guideline. Now, this is not going to be a good place to upload your 60-page guideline. But if you have like a couple paragraphs that explain, or like 1 or 2 lines explaining what each of your terms are, this is a good place to have it so they don't have to switch back and forth to a Google Doc. Okay. Cool. Oh, yeah.
In our journey to find what is the right tool for us, we have seen as interfaces like yours where you have let's call it a full utterance, and in others you get served let's say, is this date yes or no?
Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
methodology.
Yep.
Based on your experience, what has been driving your decision to come up with this versus?
Great question. It's a good segue into the next part of my demo. So we serve that as well. So I'll come back to that. Yes, I'll take the question back here first. Yeah.
For example,
Also a great segue into the next portion of my demonstration. I will show you that next. Go ahead.
sometimes you don't share, the data that you have as companies. Like, is it something that could be, could be used offline and like plug it into my customer API?
Yes.
And not use anything else, and like Datasaur would not have access
Yes.
to my data.
So given my training at Apple, everything at Datasaur is fully encrypted. We never see your data. We are SOC 2 and HIPAA compliant, and we also offer on-prem installation. So for some of our companies like hospitals and banks, they just deploy this to their own servers. We'll never get a single network call from them. Yeah.
Can you, in the database, augment or change the actual data?
Yeah, actually. This one is not as common, so I'm pleased to get the question, but I can just double click and you can change the data. And this is actually even more useful in the audio and OCR use cases I'll show next.
Does that also apply to the tokenization?
Tokenization, you have an option at the beginning of the project creation. So you can do white space tokenization. You have a couple of different options. So you can set that up at the outset. Obviously, you can like change tokenization here. So like these dates look a little funky to me. So you can make those changes on the fly, but you can also set like the tokenization principle from the very beginning.
Can you visualize the tokenization?
Yeah, actually. So during project creation, I'm happy to show this to you after today's presentation.
You tokenize emoji, like the emoji library spaces. No, it's a serious question.
We do have projects that have and render emoji. So I don't know how the tokenization of it works, but I know we render it at least. Yeah, lots of questions.
I think you probably rely on color.
Mhm.
How do you approach colorblind people? And like,
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that. Actually, one of our customers helped bring this to our attention at the beginning of the year. A lot of it was already colorblind friendly, but there were a couple elements that were not. So we actually changed the default colors that we apply in the system to make sure that it is friendly to folks of different.
which people-
So the default color set applied here.
Is there a way to select a part of the document that should be removed?
Hmm,
This is a full document, right? But
yeah.
imagine like
You mean like a whole sentence at a time and like drag and select multiple lines? Or is something different?
No, I mean, some part of the document that I care to annotate,
Mhm.
for example, the title of a document,
Mhm.
and to highlight that in order that the labeler
Mm.
already knows what to do.
Let me show you a couple more project types and then see if that helps answer your question. I won't spend as much time on the remaining project types. I am cognizant of time here, but I will show you a few more that we support. So this is what we call token or span-based labeling, right? Most commonly NER, but also used for like legal clauses. This is our row-based classification. This is very useful for things like customer service or product reviews or sentiment analysis. So here we're not interacting with the text, but rather applying a label to each and every row. Take it a step further up, and now we're applying labels to entire documents, right? So here's a PDF, and this might answer that latest question, but here we're answering questions about it, like what type of document is this? And here's a drop-down list. You also have free-form text fields, you have date pickers, right? So this allows you to ask a series of questions about the document. And most recently, as of this year, we've moved into OCR project types as well. So in OCR project types, you can plug in your own OCR library. We do integrate with AWS, GCP, and Azure libraries. And now you can you can draw a bounding box or have the predefined bounding boxes, and then select the corresponding text on the right-hand side and apply a label. So now not only do you have the text, the label, but also the coordinates on the original page, right? Very useful for things like receipts, invoices, financial statements. And last but not least, in terms of project types, we have audio projects. So here I can go through and play the original file.
Sources line?
Yes, thank you for calling. I hear you're having trouble saving your files.
So this is useful when you need to listen to the original source of the text, right? And now you can make edits to the transcript. You can also label where there's like a dog barking in the distance or a car honk or somebody's mumbling and you can't understand what they're saying. So now you can have the original source audio alongside the text interface that I showed you earlier. So for those of you asking about different project types, does this answer your question?
Is there a spectrogram in the audio?
No, but we can implement that. Our actual next thing is stereo, so handling stereo.
So hypothetically, could you handle annotating regions of HTML web pages?
Hypothetically, huh? Like 100 billion web pages. We have had people annotate web pages. We're not going to be the best solution for that because of issues. We would just render it in an iframe.
Or maybe alternatively, can you extend is there like an SDK or something? Can you extend the
the project types.
Yeah. We need to find the best way to handle this. The biggest issue for us so far has been iframe rendering, because certain websites just don't allow you to render properly, and it just screws things up. So yeah, we're looking for solutions to this. There's an open source tool that we've referred some companies to that just has a Chrome extension, and you can annotate that way. But yeah, we're open to ideas around that. People do some basic HTML annotation on this. We have also had people annotate direct Python code on Datasaur, which was an interesting use case. It went well. We don't have the IDE specialties like color coding variables and constants and stuff like that, but it was readable enough that they were able to label data on it. Okay. Now, final couple of features I wanted to highlight. This is highly underserved, I think, or overlooked in the industry is a better word, but it becomes somebody's full-time job quickly. When you're managing 20, 50 labelers, it becomes someone's full-time job to manage all of that work. So Datasaur comes with built-in analytics and metrics to track the efficiency, the velocity, and the quality of your projects, right? So for those of you familiar with the concept, there's something called inter-annotator agreement, which is the rate at which two people will agree on a label, discounting for coincidental agreement. So it's very useful for understanding which of your labelers are doing a really good job. You can also segment this by project type, because we have different strengths as human beings, right? So some people might be good at a specific type of project. Some people might need more training. Some might be ready for promotion into a reviewer role. So these are the best practices that we help you automatically capture as you're doing the labeling on our site. The final thing I want to show is our reviewer mode. So I talked about multi-pass labeling earlier, the ability to have multiple people look at the exact same document and label. Normally, it's someone's job to review every single annotation and just see where they agreed and disagreed. In Datasaur's reviewer mode, we'll just highlight the conflicts, the areas where they disagree in red. And then you only have to look at the 5 or 10% where they disagreed instead of every single label in the document. And that is one of the most popular features in our platform. So that concludes my demo of the Datasaur platform. Any final questions on that? Yeah.
Do you have platform for people who manage readers? Do you have any reader views? So when they can go back and see how much they did, their accuracy?
Sorry, one more time.
Like, do you have a kind of view for readers themselves where they can go and see like, hey, I answered 500 questions, my accuracy was
Yes.
this,
Yes.
this is my speed.
Yep. So there's a report card for labelers themselves. They can see like when a reviewer came in and overrode one of their labels. And we're looking to expand that into a full-on report card as well. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Oh, what kind of scheduling do you use to distribute all the class?
What kind of scheduling?
Yeah.
So everything in Datasaur that you saw there is built on top of APIs. So we have APIs that allow you to automatically create and assign projects. So there's a team workspace you can set up, and you can have like, let's say you have 50 labelers and you have 500 projects. You can use the API to automatically assign, 10 projects per labeler, right? There's not going to be any more advanced. We don't currently look at workloads and assign based on that, but that is something that's in the pipeline for us.
So it's how much holding that 10 tasks they're going to hold for weekend, like people have to finish.
Right. Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
I have a question. If this is the final Q&A, maybe see what's that. And there was a newspaper headline from a few months ago, and it said something like, President of Brazil skips New York to visit Ankara, something like that. And depending on the ontology, the angle you put it into. And what it really meant is Brazil favors, this is in the context of the Ukraine conflict, Brazil favors relations with Turkey over UNGA and vote or something. So depending on which NDR you use, like ultimately the business value, presumably of like ingesting newspaper headline is being able to plug it into ontology. So okay, Ankara is a city in Turkey, New York is synonymous with the General Assembly in that case. So how much value, how much business case is there behind that sort of thing? being able to deliver stuff, not just ingesting the NLP, but mapping it onto the customer's target ontology.
So the question, if I can reframe that also for the remote audience, is how much business value is there in not only understanding an article, but being able to map to the client's desired taxonomy? Great question. It's the reason that I believe I have a business. If people could just, if everything was converging into one like NLP understanding model, Datasaur wouldn't need to exist. We would label a finite amount of data and just be done with it all. But I believe that if you gave Chase and Wells Fargo the exact same data set, they would want to apply different labels to it with a different taxonomy. And that's why we can sell to both of them and exist.
Maybe following on that, so like I used to do data labeling stuff in healthcare, and there did not exist an API that was like useful for more than one of our customers. Do you find that many of your customers start with like your NLP, or sorry, your NER model? Like, are they mostly doing like a specialized NER task, or are they trying to do like very different, you know, types of classification or information extraction type tasks?
Yeah, I think this might be self-selecting, but the people who come to Datasaur typically have a very specific taxonomy they're looking for. If people just need names of people and organizations and dates, I think that's a solved problem, and they generally know that. But when they come to us, they have pretty specialized taxonomies. What we can help with is, let's just take a medical use case, for instance, right? And it's doctor's notes. We can still get names of patients and doctors and the dates of the prescription, and then they can label the more specialized like medical terms, the symptoms, the diseases, and the drugs.
Okay, it's like top-down taxonomy building.
Yeah, so like we can help with some portion of the taxonomy, and then they get to do the stuff that they're specialized to do, which I think is the way it should work.
Who owns ultimately the license rights to that ontology? Do you share it with them?
No, they do. The client does 100%.
You don't license it back?
No.
Not even for testing.
We will build models that will predict and understand your taxonomy and help you predict labels for yourself, but we won't resell that for others.
Sure, but even for internal purposes. So like John Snow Labs is building their own, you know,
Yeah.
biomedical taxonomy. They're taking a different approach.
Yeah, at this time, we do not use client data. We're not allowed to use client data to build our own internal models. Yeah. Sorry, you had a question for a while?
Yeah, I can't remember what it was now. I was thinking about the interentity agreement, but also, you know, so do you have like choices of like, you want to use Gryffindor Alpha, and you have like a standard library like that for
Yeah.
various types, and then if you want to see, like, sometimes we have like a dozen labelers on initial pilot tasks, and we want to see like standard deviations on their differences. So you've got like kind of a whole suite of that. I just wanted to confirm.
Yeah, so we use Cohen's Kappa for now. I've heard, you know, nobody's really pushed for others, but it would be relatively simple for us to implement. And then in terms of, we do have an evaluation workflow. So we allow you to upload a data set as well as an answer set, and then have be able to grade the labeler essentially.
Right.
So not necessarily standard deviation, but you can start understanding their performance, and they wouldn't know that it was a test. It would just be slipped into their normal workflow.
Right, and I assume you have the option to either randomize or not randomize the sequence in which people see the various texts that they're annotating.
At this time, the text itself wouldn't be randomized. The projects themselves can be assigned in a particular order. So it's just kind of information hierarchy. We have projects, and the projects can be, let's say, 100 files, and then you can assign them the projects in a different order.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure I can figure this all out from your website.
I'm happy
I'll
to
stop here.
chat with you about it
Very
afterwards.
interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, Rob.
Actually, I was going to ask something similar to Corinne about other inter-entity agreement. So the answer to that.
Yeah, if there's recommendations for others we should implement, that's something we're
You
open to.
started with the right one.
There's like quadratically weighted Cohen's Kappa. There was a casual competition on Cohen's Kappa. So you could, if you're typically rating on, say, 1 to 5, and whether you rate the disagreement, the difference between a 4 and a 1 is either 3 or 3 squared, or you can follow the linearity.
I see.
You know, the idea is mislabeling a 1 as a 5 is really, really bad.
Yeah.
But mislabeling a 1 as a 2 is really not a problem.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, we can definitely look into expanding the offerings there.
Yeah, I think Gryffindor Alpha is better for different variations on how you rate this news.
Yeah,
I would happily have hour-long conversations with anybody. Alone.
All right. There's only one slide left and there is 1 minute left in this. So I'm just going to try and power through that. And then I'm happy to stick around and answer as many questions as you'd like. So for the remote audience, I hope you can see the slides again. I want to make sure I get that right. Practical takeaways, right? What I promised at all of this was taking the pain out of data labeling, offering some best practices. All those questions that I asked earlier can be relevant depending on the stage of your company, depending on your particular use case in your industry. But what I want to talk through here is just, I think these are the most universal ones. These are the ones that I usually talk to every client with if they're looking for advice and looking to get started with the labeling service, right? I think you have to decide, do you want to go with an external workforce that can bring additional expertise, a lot of experience to this space? Or do you want to build this internally because of subject matter expertise, because of quality, because of cost reasons, right? There's also a hybrid approach, which has been done at a lot of my previous companies. You might have like 20 in-house labelers, and then you supplement and augment when you need a lot more data. Are subject matter experts required will be a big factor in that. And one thing that people overlook frequently is, are there any compliance or regulatory requirements? Because that will affect like what geographies you can have the people in and whether they're allowed to access the data from outside the company or not. In terms of labeling tools, just trying to understand what types of interfaces are needed. I'm glad we had those questions. We went through a lot of the different interfaces because NLP, unlike computer vision, it's not just about drawing bounding boxes and polygons around objects, right? There's many different interfaces in NLP. It was something that I underestimated when I started the company. So knowing what's important to you and making sure the tools you have are able to grow with you. Is semi-automated labeling applicable to your project? What type of automation are you looking for? What level of data isolation and permissioning is required? Because it's important with a lot of enterprise tools that you allow certain people, certain groups and organizations to only access certain parts of the data. And finally, how do you intend to manage your workforce? Again, a scaling question, but do you need that included in your software if you're going to eventually be managing 10, 20, 50 people? Okay, so if there's one cheat sheet that you need to take back to your company, what you learned tonight by attending this, hopefully this is a quick summary of it all. And that concludes my talk for today. Thank you all for coming. If you have any additional questions, you can reach me directly at this email address. My LinkedIn is there as well. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Ivan. That was amazing. And one of the things I loved most about that, which I think has changed